My name is Erik from Punk Glow Magazine. I'm here today with Frank Meyer of the Street Walking Cheetahs, who I now know is the man with 9 lives, living them all at one time after I got to know him a little bit. Uh, I asked you to send me a few things, and I got to say, I was absolutely blown away by some of the stuff you're doing because it really feels like, you think of a cat having 9 lives consecutively, but it's like you're living them all at once. So I guess let's start with the street walking cheetahs because I mean that's what most people are going to know right away. But I
Sure.
really want
Thanks,
to.
man.
You're doing so much cool stuff. I just want to kind of cover as much as we can today. So, what are you
Sure.
guys
Well,
working on right
I
now?
appreciate it. Thank you.
Hmm.
It's
So
funny sometimes when people be like, "Yeah, send me a list of a few things you're doing," and I'm like,
it felt like I was about to enter a master's class
"Yeah, well,
in a very good way. So, yeah. So, what are some of the things that have influenced you over time, just to get into the music you're doing? And
Well, as far as music goes, you know, most of my stuff's obviously based in rock and roll, but I think I've got a pretty wide variety of tastes. I grew up, my parents listened to a lot of classic rock, so I grew up on Tom Petty and the Stones and the Who and just sort of the radio in the early 80s when I was a kid. So stuff like My Sharona and Oh Mickey and the Go-Go's and Joan Jett. I mean, that was
uh,
the stuff that I was listening to when I was a kid that got me interested in rock and roll and pop music. It was probably Eddie Van Halen, hearing Van Halen, that made me want to pick up a guitar. And I was lucky in that one of the some of the kids I knew had like parents in show business, just because I grew up in LA in the 80s and this is kind of how it was, I guess. And so early on, I became friends with Dweezil Zappa, whose dad was Frank
oh, wow,
Zappa, and
yeah.
I got taught early on, sort of the basics on guitar from Dweezil and got a lot of exposure to Frank as a kid. So I think that probably had a lot to do with continuing to sort of push me in a musical direction. But also Frank Zappa was a really big influence on me in a lot of ways, not just the family in the house, which growing up around there was, you just couldn't help but be surrounded by art. But Frank was someone who did a lot of different things, and he was involved in the production of his shows, and he was doing movies and working with animators, and there was like a stage show of this album called Thingfish, and of course he was always in the studio and he was always on the road, and he just my exposure to that, he just seemed to have his hand in so many things that it seemed like you could position yourself as just a creative person and you just move in all these directions. You don't have to just play guitar or sing or make movies or write books or whatever, all the little things I do. It's more like you just are a creative person and you just keep moving in all those directions. So I think that was probably a big influence on me, as far as maybe not like my punk rock music that I made with the Cheetahs, but my overall sort of drive and approach.
Yeah, no, I feel that sensibility there, and it's so cool the connection to Frank Zappa. Were you ever at the place in Laurel Canyon? Because wasn't that kind of his
I grew
headquarters?
up there. I mean, I recorded in the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen. Frank sampled my
Wow.
voice on a synclavier. I sat in a guitar circle with Frank and Steve Vai and Dweezil. I went to rehearsals. I made music in the echo chamber and the vocal booth in the drum room. Like, I
Wow.
lived at that house for probably 20 years. Well, I mean, certainly a good decade was spent probably 3 days a week at that house. Like, that was where we grew up. My brother Brecken is an actor, and I think he would probably say the same thing, that just we both grew up surrounded in that environment, and by a lot of creative people when we were kids. So I think that rubbed off on both of us. My brother is an actor, but he's also a musician and he's also a writer, and he directs and he produces, and he's created TV shows, and he does like his version over here, kind of maybe a bit more in TV and movie land of what I'm doing over here, that's a bit more in music and movie land. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think we
Mhm.
both have a similar approach, which is just that we just sort of get ideas and go with them, and those ideas happen to be in different directions or different mediums, but whatever.
Yeah,
Don't
that's
worry
incredibly
about
cool.
that.
No, no, I mean that's just amazing because it's just like the thought of growing up as with Frank Zappa in that house. I just can't even imagine. Uh,
It was
and I
amazing,
love how it
man. I
just
mean, it
that was
was
your
just,
normal. That was.
yeah, and I just remember a lot of, like, you know we could go, like, there was a recording studio that that Dweezil and I could go fuck around in. And I work with Amit Zappa now at his production company. And Amit I've known since he was in kindergarten. Like, he's probably my oldest friend, or one of my oldest friends, besides my brother. He's another guy that just is an unbelievable creative guy. He has got more ideas than anyone I've ever met, and they're all solid, and he can move on them. And he brings in people like me and other people, and he puts us all together, and he kind of inspires us and sends us on our way to go make stuff that it's just like this unbelievable sort of factory of creativity. And very reminiscent to me, the way Amit runs his operation now is very reminiscent of growing up in the Zappa household, where it was just this sort of hotbed of like, do whatever you want, think whatever you want. There's no bad ideas. And if you fail, then great, you learn something. So go on to the next one. Like, that's just sort of how we grew up. And I think my brother and I were just really lucky, I guess, to sort of get that kind of inspiration so young.
It's also really cool to think somebody like Frank Zappa, who was such an influence, like you're part of that legacy now. And when you talk about that, that's like, it's kind of expanding through all these people. So that's really nice to hear. It's really cool.
Yeah, there's a great movie called Zappa that Alex Winter made. It's a documentary about him that if you and anyone watching this or listening hasn't seen, I highly recommend it. Because even if you don't like his music, and I love his music, but I understand that it's not for everyone. But I think that there's something fascinating about him as an artist. I would put him up there with the Beethovens and the Mozarts of the world, in that, like, there was no one like him. He created something that's totally unique and did a massive amount, a humongous body of work before he passed away. So I look, for me, at Frank Zappa, and there's a guy named Ginger Wildheart from a band called the Wildhearts, and he's another guy that's just like, you can't keep up with his level of creativity. He sticks with music, but his output is bananas. And like, he's the only guy that I like kind of look at, like, I don't know, don't get me wrong, I don't know if Ginger Wildheart is aware that I'm hot on his tail, but I look to that guy, because Frank's not around anymore, as the guy who's the only guy that's outpacing me creatively, I think, is Ginger Wildheart. Now, I'm not saying quality, like, everyone has their own opinion. Maybe people might say, like, oh, Frank Myers, his stuff sucks. Okay, then I'm not in the game. But I'm just saying, in terms of the body of work and the sheer volume of it, and if you'd like the kind of stuff I do, I think you'd go like, well, it's all pretty quality stuff. And then the other stuff with the music and the books and stuff, like, that I just keep going. And the only guy I see, like, in my ahead of me, is I'm like, okay, if Ginger's doing a really good job. So I got my eye on Ginger Wildheart as the one I'm going to take out in the top of the race.
I'll keep an eye on him, but I mean, you set the bar for me, because I was going through this stuff, and just to let people know, I mean, you've done a ton of ghostwriting, which I'd love to talk to you a little bit about. I know in the last few years I've really been enjoying, there's been a lot of just really great, like, rock and roll autobiographies. I think one of my favorites is Rob Halford's. I don't know if you've read that one yet, but that was... I
haven't, but I'm a humongous Rob Halford Judas Priest fan, so it's definitely on my list. I love Priest for sure.
If you get a chance, listen to it as an audiobook, because he narrates the whole thing, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah. He's the best.
But you're doing, like, you got to, like, work with Dave Mustaine, which is super cool.
Yeah, I had a couple things with Dave Mustaine, which is that one of my first jobs in show business was I was a runner at a recording studio on Melrose called Music Grinder. And the summer that I worked there, and I would basically run and get coffee and Taco Bell for the musicians and set up microphones for drums. Megadeth was recording So Far, So Good, So What? And they were in there the whole time that I was in there. So my whole job was taking care of Megadeth. I was like I must have been driving. So I was 16, I guess. Because I was running to get Taco Bell, and their guitar tech would jump in the car with me and, play me all these cool bands that he was into and stuff. And so years and years and years later, after I'd written a book called On the Road with the Ramones with their tour manager, Monty Melnick, the publishing company that did that book wanted to find someone to work with Dave Mustaine on his book. And so they set me up with Dave for a meeting with him and his manager at Starbucks. And, Dave's got a pretty big reputation for being an intense guy. You know what I mean? He's definitely, love him, hate him, whatever you think. Like, I'm a huge fan, but he's certainly known for being an intense guy. So I kind of just went in there, and essentially I put my Ramones book in front of him and was like, hey man, this is the last thing I did, and I'm a big fan, and blah blah blah. And he goes, all right, yeah, no, this looks great, this is cool. So why should I hire you to write my story? And meaning like,
Right.
I got a big
Right.
story to tell. Like, who the fuck are you? And I went, because you don't even know it, but you gave me my break in show business. And he went, what? And I told him the whole story and named all these details and stuff. And he was like, wow, oh, I had no idea. All right, you're hired. And I
That's
essentially got the gig because I told him, like, look, man, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't run and got your Taco Bell. And he was like, do you remember this? And I was like, oh, I remember when this person stopped by and this guitar tech. And so, a lot of my story, I think, has just been kind of like being in the right place at the right time, and just being a social person that goes out and says, hey, yeah, let's go do this thing. Let's go. I'm always like a yes guy. I'm not a really big no guy. I think that's the thing that sometimes separates maybe me from other folks, is just that, like, I tend to look at things as like, how can we pull this off, as opposed to why can't we do this, or like, here, that's a bad idea. I always go, is it? I don't know, fuck it, let's just give it a try.
Yeah. Well, then that brings me to, how did you ever connect up with James Williamson? I think that is just, I mean, the collaboration you do with him is amazing.
Thanks.
And just, I mean, beyond cool. I mean,
The James thing, kind of the same thing, right place, right time, and just having put in a lot of work. I mean, I always say real quickly, just that, like, it's all about the work.
right.
Wayne Kramer, I played with Wayne Kramer for a long time, and he taught me, he wrote a song called Doing the Work. And he just taught me it's really all about putting in the hard work. And the more you keep working, and the bigger your body of work, and the longer you're out there and cultivating relationships and making your art, it'll come, and you build this thing that more people become more familiar with, and you're building your little brand and stuff. And then opportunities come because of all this work you've put in, and the credibility you've built, and the people that you've met. And then, so something like the James Williams thing is a great example, in that I was in a band, Emmett band, the Streetwalking Cheetahs, were named after a James Williamson penned
Right.
song by the Stooges. Circling Detroit, it's the first line of the song. So obviously, and I also wrote liner notes for 5 Stooges albums for Greg Shaw at Bomb Records for the Iguana Chronicles series back in the day. And I had interviewed Ron Ashton for that. I played with Stephen McKay from the Stooges. I mean, I have some
Right.
inroads to that, mainly just being a super fan. I'm just a huge fan, and I'm influenced by the Stooges, and I've worn that on my sleeve. So, cut to years later, I met Cheetah Chrome. Through Sylvain for the New York Dolls. I interviewed Sylvain for the Ramones book. He had introduced me to Cheetah, who I also interviewed for the Ramones book. Sylvain ended up using the Streetwalking Cheetahs as his backing band for a couple tours, and then recommended us to Cheetah. And Cheetah and I ended up doing some tours together in Europe and States with my band, the Cheetahs, or in some cases, my band, Sweet Justice, backing him up and being his band. And we did a bunch of tours together in both Europe and the States. So Cheetah became a good buddy of mine, Cheetah Chrome. And so, cut to a decade later, on and off, I've been playing gigs with Cheetah Chrome over the years, just because he has lots of pickup bands, but I kind of was in that circle or whatever. And he calls me up and says, hey, we got a gig opening up for James Williamson at this theater in LA. And I'm like, James is touring? Like, what's going on? I've never met James before, just a fan. Right. And he says, yeah, he's got this record out with all these special guests doing Stooges songs, and like obscure and unreleased Stooges songs. And they're going to do a one-off show where all the guests are going to get up and sing the songs that they do on the record. I was like, wow. All right. Now, I'm not on that record. I didn't know James. I heard about it. I just get the call from Cheetah, do you want to play rhythm guitar in my band? Like you often do at this show. And I'm like, hell, motherfucking yes, I do. So I hope I can curse on this, by the way. I've been cursing up a storm.
Ginger actually insisted. So
so that was all that it was at first. And then I get an email randomly from James, who says, "Hey, it's James Williamson. Cheetah Chrome says you'd be a good fit to sing some of my Stooges songs at that show. Would you be interested?" And
Oh,
I'm just like,
wow.
"What? Like this must be a joke or something." But I, of course, I responded, "Of course I'm interested." And I went and did the show, and the show went great. And James and I got along. And one of his favorite vocalists is this guy Terry Reid, and he mentioned to me a few times, he goes, "You really remind me of Terry Reid," which I've never heard that before about my voice, but whatever. I was like, great. I mean, I like Terry Reid a lot, so I was cool with that. But he said to me a few times during that thing how much he enjoyed my singing, and which is why about a year later, when I randomly got a text from him saying, "Hey, look, the Stooges are not doing any more reunion shows, and Iggy and I are kind of going our separate ways, but I'm inspired again, and I got some songs and ideas, and I'm looking for a vocalist who can write, that's easy to work with." And I thought I really liked working with you, and I like your vocals. You remind me of Terry Reid. And I'm like, all right. He goes, want to try some songs together? So he sent me 4 song ideas, and I quickly whipped them up in my little home studio into full-blown demos, wrote and sang vocals and kind of arranged them and stuff, and sent them back to him. And I think he was kind of shocked by how quick I moved, and how, because he sent me, like, he just held his recorder up to an amplifier and just played some riffs, and I threw them into GarageBand, put them on a click track, boosted the
wow.
signal,
Okay.
added bass, added drums,
Yeah.
turned them into full-blown songs, sent them back to him probably within 24 hours, 4 songs. And he was like, "What? That's craziness, and these are great." So he said, "Let's do more." And he had the idea of bringing Petra Hayden, who is this world-renowned, incredible vocalist, and the daughter of jazz bass player legend Charlie Hayden. And he wanted to pair us up and have us do a lot of singing together, which was terrifying prospect, because she's a much better singer than I. But he liked this idea of sort of her opera trained, her voice, which is this, it's an incredible singer, and something about my kind of whiskey rock and roll thing. He liked that pairing, and so James and I did the writing for the record. We wrote a whole album. Petra came in. We wrote a lot of stuff for Petra because we knew we had her as like a weapon in our tool belt. So we wrote a lot of stuff knowing, like, oh, this will be good for Petra, or this will be a good duet, or this is good for me, but Petra will do the harmonies, blah, blah, blah. And we wrote this whole record. And I think it was originally, he was thinking it was a solo record, but we had such a good camaraderie between everyone in the band, and me, him, and Petra, that he goes, "Why don't we just make a band and call it?" The very last day of recording, he goes, "So this is a band, right?" And we were like, "Yeah, I guess." I mean, me and Petra were just like, "Did James Williamson just ask us to be in his band?" Fuck yeah, this is a band. So we went on the road and did a handful of like record release party shows, which were a blast, because I got to sing the Stooges songs and sing songs that I wrote with James, so the whole thing was just a trip. And then he called me one other time, about another year after that, to write with him and Dennis Tech from Radio Birdman, for their album together called 2 on 1, and or 2 to 1, and something like that. And they didn't really need me as a vocalist because Dennis is a great singer, but I think they just wanted just some ideas and sort of someone to bounce ideas off. So they sent me some stuff, and I sent them some stuff, and I ended up with 3 or 4 songs on that. I don't know. I've written a lot of songs, man. Sometimes I forget how many I've written. But so that's how I got involved with James. And that's kind of the same thing with a lot of, a lot of the folks I meet, I just kind of like meet them through somebody. And again, I kind of feel like it's just like, there's a work ethic that I put into what I do. And I think that's the thing that ends up making it all happen,
Yeah. Well, for people who want to explore more of your voice too, because I really enjoyed listening to some of the different projects you're working on, is you have this great rock and roll voice, but you also have a great blues voice, a great country. Like you kind of, there's a lot more to your voice than I think people might realize too.
Well, thank you. My favorite singer is probably Mick Jagger, and Mick Jagger can sing anything. And the best part to me about Mick is that he sells it no matter what. So like Mick Jagger is a British dude, but when he puts on a fake country accent on like some of the stuff on some girls, it seems like it would not work. And yet somehow he absolutely sells it, and it works, and it's great. And when he gets punky, it sounds punk. And when he sings the blues, it sounds bluesy. And so, Steven Tyler's another vocalist back in the day. It's Robin Zander. I just liked growing up the guys that influenced me were the guys who could kind of sing anything. And so I just kind of, I don't think I mean, I really wanted to be a guitar player at first, not even a singer, but as the guy that was also writing the songs, at some point I just found it too difficult to keep looking for people to sing my songs. And, you know, at some point it was just like, well, I can do this. And so I kind of just worked up singing out of frustration with working with vocalists, really. But you know, at some point I took vocal lessons because I decided if I was going to do it, I didn't want to blow my voice out, and I wanted to actually know what the hell I was doing. And then, you know, I just got to a point where I sang so often, again, goes back into just, I just kept singing and singing and singing and singing and singing everything and saying yes to a lot of gigs that were way out of my wheelhouse. I sang with Bob DeRoe from Schoolhouse Rock. I went on 2 tours as a vocalist in the Schoolhouse Rock band, full jazz orchestra with all the members of the original Schoolhouse Rock band and a bunch of young people, of which I was one, and I was Bob DeRoe's auxiliary vocalist, and I was singing Lolly Lolly. There's Lolly Lolly Lolly. Get your adverbs here is a 3-part barbershop harmony for 3 minutes straight, right. And I sang it every single night on the road. Wow. Lolly Lolly Lolly, get your adverb. I mean, I was singing lead, harmonies, voices, cartoon voices, all sorts of stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, I grew up on Schoolhouse Rock, but I'd never done any Broadway or theater, any stuff like that before. And all of a sudden, you know, but when Bob DeRoe says, hey, Frank, do you want to come and on the road and sing the Schoolhouse Rock songs with me? I could use another vocalist. I like the way you sing. I was like, yeah, I mean, of course the answer is yes. And then when I started listening to the material, like from a vocalist point of view, I was like, oh shit, this is going to be rough. There's a lot going on here, but it was super awesome and challenging. And I learned tons, you know, from Bob and all the people we worked with and all the people I was, you know, singing with and stuff. And just those kind of things just, you know, kept pushing me to the point where I got to become a very, chameleon-like vocalist, you know what I mean? So like, I don't like, meaning if I want to sing like a gritty rock and roll singer, you know, that's like an effects box. Like, you know how guitar players have effects boxes? Totally. So like the grit is not there unless I want the grit to be there. As far as singing, you know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes I can talk all day and I might get hoarse.
Oh no, I'm a singer too, so I get it. It's
yeah, but so like, you know, there's different, you got all these like effects you can throw on as a singer. So like the grit is something I do when I want to sound gritty, but I don't always want to sound gritty. So I take that effect off in a lot of situations. And at some point I really worked on my falsetto so that I got a falsetto that was essentially just a strong head voice in my falsetto range. Or you could look at it as a falsetto voice or a falsetto in a head voice range. But I kind of figured out, and you know, because I started listening to vocalists that could do this, to combine the head voice and the falsetto so that like you're not actually doing like a falsetto on a lot of men inherently loses its bottom end.
Right.
Unless you figure out how not to, you know what I mean? And I was always had a low voice, but I developed my baritone. So at this point, I've got a pretty wide range I can do. Again, I'm not saying my range seems wide unless I sing next to Petra Haden. And then I realize my range is like this. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I'm just saying for the type of singers that I tend to be in the circles with, I generally have a pretty good range, and I'm a good auxiliary guy to bring in or sing with you or sing your harmonies, blah, blah, blah. But it's all relative because I've sang with other vocalists who can bury me. And therefore I always am humbled, and I always know like you're only as good as the other dudes in the room. You know what I mean? Like there's someone in the other room that will smoke you. So close that door.
every time you step into that space with somebody go, man, this guy's so much better than me. It kind of pushes you to it's either I'm going to grow to that or I'm going to step back. And it's
and that's the way I've always looked at it. Is I've tried to surround myself with people as often as I can who are better than me, so that I'm, you know, I bring what I've got to the table, but I want to be pushed, you know. So James, it's my dog Mojo. James is a great. Hey Mojo, calm down, buddy. James is a great guy to work with because James knows what he wants, and he'll push you, and he has no problem saying, yeah, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not used to hearing that from a lot of dudes. A lot of people I work with are like, this is great, this is great, this is great. You know, he'd be like, nah, go back to the drawing board on that. And I'm like, what? You know, but like, okay, by the time he liked it, we'd gotten to a better place. So I felt like this was all good back and forth. You know what I mean? You gotta work, you gotta challenge yourself. I mean, if you're just surrounding yourself with yes men all the time, you're never gonna like grow. You know, you have to like keep pushing, you know.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to like a whole different part of your career, which I don't want to miss out on, is Thor. I watched part of that trailer. It almost brought me to tears. I was just so moved. I'm like, how did you ever connect up with that guy? It's so cool.
I met Thor because I was in the earlier part of my career, I was a journalist when I was like in the early days of the Street Walking Cheetahs, the way that I like in the mid 90s, the way I was making my money outside, you know, after I graduated college and stuff, was like writing for magazines and fanzines as a freelance writer, and working as a publicist, record companies, management companies, stuff like that. And then eventually when the Cheetahs got signed and started touring, I sort of shifted my career and got more into the writing, and then eventually directing and producing and behind the scenes stuff. But at that time, around say 95, I was writing for a magazine, 95, 96. I was writing for a magazine called Pop Smear out of New York. And I had done this interview with them, with David Lee Roth, at a time that, you know, Dave wasn't at a career high, but I was a huge Dave fan. So I sort of ignored the reality of the fact that he wasn't at a career high and just sort of wrote this article like, you know, like because he's Diamond Dave and he's always on top of the world. And the article did really well for the magazine, and Dave loved it. And I started this relationship with David Lee Roth where I was like writing, he was inviting me to all this stuff, and I was sort of his go-to writer. And in the midst of that, Pop Smear said, hey, you know, we love these sort of like adventures with your favorite rock stars articles you're writing. Is there someone else that you'd want to do one with? And I said, yes, but it's not going to be like David Lee Roth. He's not as mainstream of a star or as big of a star, but there's this heavy metal gladiator I remember from when I was a kid, you know, from like Kerrang magazine, named Thor. I have no idea where he is in the world or what he's doing, but I got to track him down.
So you actually tracked him down to do all this.
So I tracked him down in, I think he was living in like South Carolina or something at the time. And he was married and he was completely retired, but he did have a little indie sort of record label and website where he was selling some of the old Thor stuff. So I reached out, I think, to the guy that ran the site. He was this guy named Thunder Geek, Michael Pilmner, and he was Thor's buddy and helping him out with this stuff. And like me, was just basically just a fan. And so he put me in touch with Thor. I interviewed Thor for the magazine. I loved Thor. I just thought he was the coolest guy and so funny and so genuine and so charming, and still convinced that Gladiator Rock is just a breath away from being huge. And he was just, you know, he had the best like real life.
I felt that. I mean,
he's like, I mean, everything I'm telling you now is exactly the same with Thor. As long as they know he's heartfelt about what he does, and he has these grand, you know, ideas about what rock and roll and theatrics should be. And he's just been trying, you know, his gladiator heart out for all these years to make it work. When I met him, he was kind of briefly retired, but the article got released, and a few other things kind of happened around that time where he felt like, hey, maybe now is a good time to like relaunch this thing. And it essentially sort of helped, you know, kick off his comeback. And so I just stayed in touch with him. And then over the years, as he was, you know, making albums again, I would send him ideas or suggest that I basically just stayed in the mix with them.
Right.
And at some point I was playing guitar in his band really briefly. And I produced a few tracks for a compilation album for him. And that, I think, kind of got us writing together, because I was like, man, we should go do a you know, an album, some good old fashioned 1980 sounding heavy metal record, like your early stuff. And I wrote a few song ideas for that and sent it to him, and we got a record deal and made that record, and that was Thor Against the World. And then ever since then, I've pretty much written at least 1 to 4 songs off every Thor record, and I usually play on that stuff and sing and produce it. And I also did a record, only other album I did with him from top to bottom is called Metal Avenger, and that album is unbelievable. It's got Henry Rollins on it. It's got JJ French from Twisted Sister. It's got Betsy Bitch. It's got Jack Starr from Virgin Steel. It's got Cheetah Chrome. It's got Joey Shithead from DOA. It's got Brian Forsythe from Kix. It's like this insane lineup of metal, glam, punk, theatrical rock people all on this record. And like, me and Thor wrote the whole record top to bottom. I mean, there's a couple other writers involved for sure. I'm not trying to say that like take the lion's share, but like, that's a record where we sat down and said, we're going to make this record. And we brought in some other musicians and writers, started calling up people, making this whole thing. Bruce Duff from my band, the Streetwalking Cheetahs, heavily involved in that as well. He was sort of the other key component in like what the whole thing was going to be. But you know, we just went in and made that thing like top to bottom, and Bruce and I co-produced and helped assemble it all. And, you know, it was a killer, super fun, amazing experience. And since then I've written songs off every one of his albums. So,
Nice.
you know, it's been
I love that old
20-year deep.
feel.
I've been rolling with him for like 2 decades. It's kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. Yeah, I mean,
and then I was involved in the movie I Am Thor, which is a documentary about him. But that was really, I was just a co-producer on that. Like I direct a lot of stuff, you know, these days, but at that time I essentially just was helping them out as much as I can. You know, there's a guy named Ryan White who directed that, and he's another guy like me that was just a fan that got involved with Thor. And just, you know, at some point Ryan was like, man, I kind of feel like there's a movie in this. I'm like, there's absolutely a movie in it. I was like, anything I can do to help you. And, you know, for a long time, probably 8 years, I just would help them out in whatever way, never asked for a dime, never, just was just like, I know this is a great idea, you guys. I want to see this movie. Do your thing, and whatever I can do to help out. And they were kind enough to turn that into a producer credit. But he said to me after, he goes, that's literally what a producer does. What you did, you just never asked for anything. So we made, you know, that movie came out, and since then I've directed a bunch of documentary films as well. And, you know, a bunch of, that's what I do for a living now when I'm not playing music, is I'm a director. And it's, which again, same gig. I'm just the guy in the room with the most ideas, telling everyone where to stand and what their lines are, whatever, you know.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the thing with creativity. It's like, you know, for a creative person, it's like just wherever you put them, they land and something starts to happen.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of it is different, being flexible, in the sense that like I don't always have to be the front guy, the singer, the director, the lead guitar player. I can, you know, in Cheetah Chrome's band, I was a rhythm guitar player. In Thor, if I play live with him, I might do some solos, but like it's his show. Like you're not coming to see Frank Meyer play guitar in a Thor band. You're going to see Thor and the whole theatrics of it. So, you know, when I'm with James, I know going in, I am an auxiliary player to help James realize his vision, and therefore he's in charge, and I'm here to essentially do the best I can to help facilitate his ideas, and then bring my creativity ideas, whatever I can, to the table if it's appropriate. Because there's time, like when I was playing with Bob Duro, not appropriate for me to come in with a bunch of ideas. This shit is laid out. This shit is classics. I'm there to hit the notes and hit my marks. That's you know. So when you're doing certain gigs, you got to know your lane and your role and stick to it. And like, I don't go into a sideman position with a frontman mentality. But I'll tell you this, when I'm the frontman, I have a frontman mentality, and I'm going to tell people, you know, I'm going to be very upfront about like, here are my ideas. And if someone goes, well, I don't like it, I go, well, there's the door. Go. I'm surrounding myself with people who are, you know, don't get me wrong, I want to hear what everyone in the band has to say, or the project, and you know, when I work as a director, I'm super open. Like you could be a fucking PA or a camera op and turn to me and go, hey man, what are you thinking? If it's a good idea, I'd be like, boom, I
Oh,
like this
totally,
guy,
totally.
I'm into
Yeah.
it. But at the same time, like, I'm not the guy who's going to sit there and argue with you over shit. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you're in charge, you tell me what to do, and that's what we do. If I'm in charge and we have an impasse, then I'm telling you what to do,
Well, that's the
and
thing.
you
There
got to
has to
do
be a
it.
vision coming from somewhere.
Yeah, every team needs a quarterback. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's just, it doesn't mean that every other role isn't absolutely as valuable. That's why it's a team. But you can't have everyone gets equal say all the
Right.
times and everything, because then nothing ever gets done, because everyone has got a different opinion. At some point, you have to have a leader or leadership and kind of go like, well, what do you think? You know,
Right.
that's why you're in this position, you know. Um, and
I,
sometimes I'm that guy, but sometimes I'm the guy turning to the leader going, what do you think, James? What can I do to help you out here? You know?
I hate to do this, but we're running out of time, and I could listen to talk for hours about this stuff because there's just so much more I wanted to ask you. But while I still have you, just a few things just for the punk club people who watch this. Anything about guitars you play? Any preferences? Um,
I'm a Telecaster guy, so for the most part, I don't know how much you can see behind there, but I play Fender Telecasters for the most part. I certainly like the sound of a Strat. I love a Les Paul, love an SG, but I just, for me, a Telecaster just does the job. It's like a baseball bat. It's just a simple instrument, not a lot of buttons, not a lot of choices.
yeah.
You got to do it all with your hands, you know, and I like that. I minimal effects on stage. You know, I kind of learned the old-fashioned way through you know, being a big fan of guys like Buddy Guy and a couple blues players I came up with, that like, it's all in your fingers, so you don't
Yeah.
need all that shit.
Any endorsements you want to give a shout out to?
Well, I would just say, so the couple things that I'm really focused on this year, the Cheetahs have a new EP we're working on, and we just put out an album called All the Covers and More. That was like a double album collection of all the covers and more that we ever recorded. It's got tons of special guests, a lot of the people we've been talking about. And then our Rumbar Records just did a deluxe edition of our last album called One More Drink, and it's got a bunch of bonus tracks and a brand new song on it. So the Cheetahs are knocking out projects left and right. I have a blues rock band. I say blues rock. It's a rock and roll band, but it's probably a little bluesier sounding than a lot of my other stuff, called Highway 61. And
Yeah.
we're also signed to Rumbar Records. And that album is out on March 24th. And that album is called Driving South. And that's the band that I essentially started in high school with my high school friends, that morphed into Highway 61 in the early 90s. And we put it back together recently and made an album. And it's killer, and we're going out on tour in March with Atom Bomb and doing a bunch of dates. And then the rest of my year is really spent on this band I started called Trading Aces, that's based in Copenhagen. And it's a sleaze metal band in the
Great metal
vein of
stuff.
like
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses, Zodiac, Mind Warp, Aerosmith. You know, it's a sleaze rock, Hanoi Rocks. It's like that kind of vibe. Michael Monroe, you know, it's like sleazy, punky metal. And it's based essentially out of Europe, with the members of a band called Warrior Soul and some guys from a band called the City Kids out of the UK. And the idea was to put something together that we could really easily tour around Europe and the rest of the world. And I've just always loved that kind of music and had a soft spot for just, you know, pure, unadulterated, sleazy hard rock.
Yeah.
So
No, and
I
I gotta say that just had a really cool old school metal feel to it. And
yeah,
the Highway 61 is if people want to hear another side of your voice, I think that's a really great, there's a whole different character to it. So
yeah, for sure. That stuff's almost closer to like Stevie Ray Vaughan or the Stones or Santana even
very
sometimes.
cool. Yeah.
But then if anyone out there is in the Spain area, I'm going to be touring with Trading Aces in May all over Spain.
Oh, very cool.
And so the idea is basically just to kind of, as time goes on, is to kind of, you know, continue bopping between these handful of music projects and continuing to make documentaries and
Yeah.
films. And I direct a lot of music videos for a lot of other artists as well. So I'm really enjoying directing music videos these days.
So people want to follow you on social media. What are some of the best spots?
On Instagram, I am the Frank Meyer, and it's Meyer, like Oscar Meyer. Yes, I have two hot dog references in my name, Oscar Meyer and Frankfurter. You can imagine on the schoolyard as a kid, it was just a lot of hot dog references and jokes, double entendres, triple entendres.
Yeah.
And then on Facebook, I'm Frank M. Meyer because there's a lot of Germans and named Frank Meyer, apparently, but my middle initial is also an M. So I separated myself from the pack that way. And then, you can find my music on Bandcamp, Frank Meyer, and you can find Highway 61 and Trading Aces and the Streetwalking Cheetahs are all on Bandcamp and Spotify and YouTube, and they're all on Instagram and they're all on Facebook. I'm not really I hate Twitter, so I'm actively not on Twitter.
I'm the same. Yeah.
Especially these days, it's gotten such a cesspool. I'm just not into it. And I haven't started TikTok yet because I'm just not that.
I feel you. I feel you.
I got records to make, man. I can't. I don't have time resizing all my videos and shit.
Just so people realize, in this time, you've actually there were 3 albums that just weren't made. So, but hey, I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you so much.